and I hope to leave some time at the end for any questions that might come up as I go through this. So here's my wish list for neurodegenerative research to begin with. I'll start at the beginning, as all good stories should, with my own diagnosis. Although, of course, symptoms started a few years before that. It actually happened on a hike in Tikal, Guatemala. I was about 25 years old at the time, 25, 26 years old. And I looked down and I noticed my foot was tremoring. I didn't think much of it at the time, though. It's not something that I thought enough of it just to take notice and to remember the occasion, but I didn't think enough of it to actually do anything about it. Not that there's anything that could have been done. I mean, at the moment, there's still nothing that I could take that could have actually slowed or stopped the disease progression at that point. Although the work that I think a lot of people are doing is to get us to the point where at that point, I would have taken a pill or some kind of medication that would have stopped the disease in its tracks at that place. And then this whole ordeal that is Parkinson's disease would have basically been done with at that point. But it didn't, and it continued to progress until I was about 29 years old when I finally showed up at a movement disorder clinic and got my diagnosis. Now, there's a lot that you go through once you get a diagnosis like that, but one of the first things you do is you hop on the internet and you start searching Parkinson's disease, and you see images like this one. Now, I don't know about what all of you think there, but I don't see a lot of resemblance to what I'm experiencing in this picture here. So I went back through my memory banks and I tried to think, what do I know about Parkinson's disease at the time? And the only image I had in my head was this one. This was the image that I connected with when I went back and looked into what I thought of as Parkinson's disease. Muhammad Ali and Michael J. Fox, to some extent, was basically the only reference points I had. And while it was inspiring to see Muhammad Ali obviously lifting the flame, it was humbling at the same time, and it was scary as well to see the symptoms that he was experiencing, even though he was still fairly young at this time, and he wasn't as far gone as he would end up being, but he was clearly still it was clearly still very difficult for him to do the things that he wanted to do. So I turned looking for inspiration. Now, at the time of my diagnosis, I was living and working in China. I was helping run a pretty big Chinese education company. But I soon realized that China was not going to be a great place for me to live with this disease long term. So I came back home and I started to delve into the research. And I was lucky enough to come across this woman. Her name is Dr. Jean Loring. And she invited me to come to her clinic come to her lab down in San Diego, where she was working on iPS cells. She was working on actually transplanting cells into the brains of patients. She's actually made a lot of stunning progress, thanks in large part to a patient group that she's been working with called Summit for Stem Cells. And this was really a real trigger for my early inspiration into this field. I saw all of the amazing things that can happen when researchers and patients come together to work on a shared project. And they've now, actually thanks in large part to both of their work, they've now developed what they're doing into a company called Aspen Neuroscience, which just raised $70 million to make iPS stem cell transplantation a reality for people with Parkinson's. My next source of inspiration came from this man. When I went to the World Parkinson's Congress in Portland in 2016, and I saw Tom Isaacs on stage give this song, which I'm about to play for you here now. I just want to make sure that the volume will work. Oh, it might not be working. Hold on, I might need to start sharing my screen one more time. Hold on. Okay, now it should work. Let me know if you can't hear what the song when it starts playing.
Grow every stem cell, search every gene, sequence every exome, till you find the key. Misfolded proteins clumping in my brain. Please disaggregate my alpha synuclein. Drill a hole in my brain. See how deep you can go. Then insert some old tube filled with a placebo. I've got dysfunctional mitochondria, lack of dopa in my basal ganglia. There's a breakthrough out there, but there's one thing I wish: that you give it to us, not to rats or to fish. Grow every stem cell, search every gene, sequence every exome, till we cure PD.
So Tom was a big personal inspiration for me early on in my journey to figure out what I wanted to do about this disease. And he was one of the founders of the Cure Parkinson's Trust, which has done some amazing things to help advance Parkinson's research over the years. Unfortunately, he's since passed away, but he's been a great inspiration for me throughout my journey. Something that everybody needs. And so what I was inspired to do via all those different avenues was to first go out and educate myself. This was back in 2016. I sought to find out as much as I possibly could about this disease. And while reading the papers was fun, it took a little while to understand some of the words that were being said in those papers, because it had been a while since I had taken any biology classes. I at some point wanted to go a little bit further. I wanted to really get a sense of what was out there, what was on the bleeding edge of research. So I started to travel. I went from one research center to another. It started with that first lab in San Diego, but then it spread. And these are all the each pin here is a lab that I went and visited at some point over the last 3 or 4 years. So as you can see, I bounced around to a lot of different centers and got a pretty good sense, I would say, of what the cutting edge of research was like. This is basically what I concluded from that. So I've just made this video that I hope to share with the world pretty soon. It's kind of a brusque overview of what I think is now happening in my brain and in the brains of people with Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. I appreciate if, as you're watching this, if you have any criticism as well, if you have any things that you think I got wrong entirely, please let me know. It's more than anything else, I just want to make sure that I get this right before I put it out into the world. So hopefully, here we go. like I said, that was just kind of a broad overview of what I think of now when I think of neurodegenerative diseases, and what we kind of need to start doing to move things forward. Now, another humbling kind of realization that I had along the way as I learned more and more about what the research community was doing is that there's a huge gap between what we know and what we need to know to properly intervene in these diseases. And to illustrate that gap, I think it resembles the difference between these two structures as well. And I'm sure a lot of you can recognize this much easier than I can, but this is a mouse brain and a human brain lined up next to each other. And so to suffice to say, there's a huge gap that we still need to bridge, I think anyways, if we're gonna be able to properly intervene in all that goes wrong in neurodegenerative diseases. And a fundamental part of that is how we conduct research and how we're incentivized to conduct research. And somebody who really illuminated this problem to me in a quote was a man named Dr. Dario Alessi, who in an interview I did with him said this: "Generally, I think we understand less than 1/10,000th of all that there is to understand in biology. We know virtually nothing about how biology is controlled and how it works. There isn't a lot of funding to do the fundamental research on one gene or one protein that would be needed to really understand these things. Funding bodies want us to solve diseases and work with companies to figure out shortcuts that can make it into a drug. But we don't have the fundamental basis that is needed to really solve these problems." And that there's that key part there, that's shortcut. I mean, I look back at our history of trying to solve these diseases, and I mean, it's pretty easy to say that it's littered with failure, especially when it comes to disease-modifying trials. We've had, I think, up till now, almost 20 disease-modifying trials make it to phase 3 clinical trial, and they've all come up short. And I think a big reason for that is because of these shortcuts that we're forced to take in developing therapies for these diseases. Another key fundamental problem was illuminated to me by Dr. John Hardy, who said this: "Once you've got 2 or more variables, it becomes incredibly hard to work out what is important. Everything we do is dependent upon solving 1 variable at a time, which is very inefficient. No one has come up with a better way yet." And that seems to me like a pretty fundamental stumbling block. I'm pretty sure that if you look inside the brains of anybody with a neurodegenerative disease, you'll see way more than one thing going wrong at any given time. We need to figure out smarter ways to intervene so that we can actually try to tackle more than one problem going on at any given time. But enough of that for now. Here's what I hope. At the end of the day, I'm still an optimist. I still believe that there's a better future in store for me and for all the people living out there with neurodegenerative diseases. But it's going to take some innovative strategies going forward. And this is what I hope to see over the next 10 years in terms of basically my wish list. And I'll sum it up again at the end. But it can be summed up as more connections, better tools, and better therapies. So the first thing I would like to see is more connections made to integrate patients into the research process. At the moment, and I've been to dozens and dozens of academic centers and biotech labs, many of which I was the first patient to ever walk through their doors, let alone address a large group of them. What I see is that first an observation is made in the clinic. It gets translated into basic, or a single independent variable is isolated by basic scientists. They try to tweak that independent variable to make it so, and then a funding body comes along, picks up on that variable, takes it to the next stage. Industry comes along, puts it into a drug, and then they try to push it through the regulatory bodies. This is essentially the main players that are involved in the development of any therapy. But I think if we were to add patients into the mix, we would quickly see that it really adds color to what we're trying to do here. And this is something that I've been involved in for a while now, is trying to integrate the patient voice into everything that gets done throughout the research process. And I've come across a lot of pushback along the way because there's a kind of inherent belief that patients don't have a lot to give, especially to the basic science and to the fundamental research that goes on. But I'm part of a couple efforts that are trying to change that. One is called the PD Avengers, which has the pretty audacious goal of trying to end Parkinson's disease. Though we've already made some pretty great strides in that area, and I'll show you one video that illustrates that in a moment. But another one is the Patient Advisory Board at the Toronto Western Hospital Movement Disorder Clinic. And I really give a lot of credit to the doctors and scientists that work at the Toronto Western Hospital for giving us this opportunity to input the patient voice into a lot of the decision-making processes that go on at Toronto Western now. It's been about 7 or 8 months since we started the board, and we've already made an indelible impact on the way things are done at Toronto Western Hospital. And we hope that it's a model that other people will be able to follow going forward, and we hope to be able to say more about it in the future. Coming back to the PD Avengers, I want to show you one video that was just recently made by one of the Avengers that started to make quite a substantial amount of waves on social media and across the world. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, but hopefully it'll play here.
See how you see his fingers. See his fingers. See his fingers.
You've got the words to change a nation, but you're biting your tongue. You've spent a lifetime stuck in silence, afraid you'll say something wrong. If no one ever hears it, how we gonna learn your song? So come on, come on, come on, come on. You've got a heart as loud as lion, so why let your voice be tamed? Maybe we're a little different, there's no need to be ashamed. You've got the light to fight the shadow, so stop hiding it away. Come on, come on. I wanna sing, I wanna shout, I wanna scream till the words dry out. So put it in all of the papers, I'm not afraid. They can read all about it, read all about it. Oh, 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 At night we're waking up the neighbors while we sing away the blues, making sure that we're remembered, yeah, 'cause we all matter too. If the truth has been forbidden, then we're breaking all the rules. So come on, come on, come on, come on. Let's get the TV and the radio to play our tune again. It's about time we got some airplay of our version of events. There's no need to be afraid, I will sing with you, my friend. Come on, come on. I wanna sing, I wanna shout, I wanna scream till the words dry out. So put it in all of the papers, I'm not afraid. They can read all about it, read all about it. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, we're all wonderful, wonderful people. So when did we all get so fearful? Now we're finally finding our voices. So take a chance, come help me sing this. Yeah, we're all wonderful, wonderful people. So when did we all get so fearful? And now we're finally finding our voices. Just take a chance, come help me sing this. I wanna sing, I wanna shout, I wanna scream till the words dry out. So put it in all of the papers, I'm not afraid. They can read all about it, read all about it. Oh, 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 oh,
So that video is made by Amatola Thomas, who's one of the Avengers. And as you can see, I think the patient voice is really starting to make waves in a variety of different ways. And I hope that this initiative continues and that it's integrated into as many of these areas in the system as possible. Now, the second thing, in addition to just integrating patient voice into the research process, into every stage of development, I wish that there was also more focus on individuals. And here's a quick quote from the book I just recently wrote that kind of illustrates that. Almost everything we know about this disease comes from studies into groups of people. Those people get plotted as dots on a graph, a line that then gets drawn through the middle of the group reflecting the group's average. That average becomes the result of the study, an average that almost none of the dots fall on. And I'm sure a lot of the doctors and researchers on this call will be very familiar with these kinds of regression analyses. And this is kind of what a basic one looks like for those who might not be as familiar. Too much research that I've seen tries to lump people with this clinical label called Parkinson's disease into one nice group that they can then publish a study about. Unfortunately, because of the heterogeneity of this disease, as you can see on this graph, none of the dots really line up very well with the average that becomes the result of this study. So this is one kind of fundamental stumbling block, I think, that is really a big reason why a lot of the therapies that we've tried to push through development have ultimately been unsuccessful. Now, in addition to just focusing on individuals in our studies, I wish we were also spending more time just developing tools that would empower individual patients to make better decisions for their own healthcare. I mean, every day patients are running their own clinical trials. Each day we change the kind of food we eat, the amount of sleep we get, our level of hydration, and our medications as well. I mean, we're constantly doing experiments, trying to figure out the optimal dose for every new medication that we get prescribed. So I wish that there was more time spent just developing better tools that would help individuals make better decisions for their own healthcare. Because ultimately, and this is something that you'll see in the next slide, this is an image that I think brilliantly sums up the state of healthcare today. Essentially, we get about 1 hour every year with a specialist to take care of our disease. However, we live with this disease 24 hours a day, and every moment of every day is slightly different from the next. And it's something that never entirely goes away. So I wish future healthcare systems would be designed with the goal in mind of making sure that we had the kind of interdisciplinary care that we need. And to kind of guide those designs, I wish there's two questions that were being asked of all of our healthcare systems. And those two questions are this. How should we care for each other? I mean, just as human beings, how should we design our systems to optimize better care for each other? And what would I need what would I want if I needed it? If I needed the kind of healthcare, if I was diagnosed with one of these diseases, what kind of care would I want to see? And I think it would come down to this interdisciplinary care model that's being developed now, where patients get access to a wide variety of specialists, kind of not exactly at their beck and call, but much more accessible than the current system allows. In addition, I wish that we had access to kind of comprehensive neurotherapy centers that were open, hopefully, ideally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where patients could walk into and get the kind of care that they need at any given time. Now, there are some centers like this available. I visited one in northern Italy called the European Parkinson's Therapy Center. It's kind of a retreat. It's in this beautiful area just on the southern tip of the Alps. It's in a hot spring, and their patients get access to a wide variety of different specialists that help them optimize various aspects of their life that all play a role in how this disease manifests. And we need these kind of centers to optimize all aspects. The third list is to fix science. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm sure a lot of the researchers who are on this call again will be much more familiar with some of the flaws in science than I am. But I just wanted to illuminate some of them here as well. So there's a couple comics that I like to prescribe to. The first one here is Pedromics, who also has a Twitter account, who's got a lot of, I think, very biting comics that tell a lot about the state of what basic research is like. Another one that I really enjoy is from PhD Comics, sorry. And I'll give everyone a moment to go through this. Even though it's a little bit of a hyperbole in some regards, it's not too far of a stretch in others. Now, before I really entered this, or took on this endeavor to learn as much as I could about the research community, I think I had a kind of naive understanding of what science was. I believed it was this kind of pure, almost temple of holy knowledge, where all that we know about the world emerges almost fully formed. I've realized since then that there's some gaps along the way, and that it's not a perfect system by any means. And that no system is perfect, obviously, but that we should be striving to make it a little bit more perfect than it is today. And this goes not only for publishing, but almost every aspect of how research gets funded and some of the motivating aspects that drive research forward. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about this, I'd recommend this article that I wrote with Professor Hilal Lachelle. You can see it on my site there, tomorrowedition.com, called Rewriting the World. It was also published in Education. And you can just look more about some of our ideas for how to fix some of the aspects of publishing in science. And the premise essentially is to reverse the relationship between writers and publishers, so that publishers are more at the beck and call of writers rather than what it is at the current moment. The next thing that I think would help science a long way is if we had a little bit smarter target selection. What I mean by that is illustrated here. So since we've sequenced the human genome back in 2000, we've had this kind of explosion of new research into we've had this explosion of GWAS studies in particular that have identified all sorts of genes that are associated with all sorts of ailments. However, if you'll notice here in particular, what we've actually seen as a result of this is that we've had more and more publications, that's the green line, on fewer and fewer genes. So we've been hyper-focusing on a few different genes in our genome while letting the others go basically unexamined. And while what we've seen is that there's been this kind of like gravitational pull towards certain genes and ignoring all the other ones, as if they had no role to play in our health and our well-being. And I think this is more a factor of the motivational forces that drive publishing than it is about the actual science itself. So we need to be a little bit smarter about how we do things, and not just be drawn to the genes of interest in any given day or any given research field. The next kind of treatment that I would give to help fix science would be to open science up a little bit more. There's a couple initiatives that are spearing this forward, but essentially the reason for this is because of how long it takes for a drug to go from discovery to FDA approval, if it ever gets there. It's about a 15-year process that I think is rife with inefficiencies and needs to be shrunk if we're going to effectively tackle some of these diseases in a time frame that's relevant for patients living with them today. And some things that can be done is, one, start more open science networks. And there's one here opening in Canada now, the Canadian Open Parkinson's Network, that seeks to make data available across platforms around Canada. There's another initiative started by a woman named Marina. Her handle is @SparkPD, and it's shareyourpaper.org. It's just an avenue for researchers to allow patients and allow the public in general and your colleagues as well to access any paper that you've ever written. You just upload your papers onto shareyourpaper.org, and then the whole community is allowed to access them and share your work with everybody. But there's another initiative that I think is actually going to make an even bigger impact, or I hope will make a bigger impact, that I'm a part of. And it's a coalition between these groups, among others. And that's an open science platform for drug discovery. And I'll have more to say about this one in the future. There's not too much I can say about it at the moment. We just applied for a pretty big grant from the Canadian government to basically develop an open science platform of drug discovery that will, I think, really speed up how we do some of the basic science and how we do some of the preclinical development of drugs, and do away with a lot of the impediments that really slow things down, like IP and a few of the other things that really slow down the process of how we actually develop drugs. So yeah, open science would be a great remedy, I think, to some of the problems that we face. Also, final kind of part of the third remedy would be to question everything. There's a lot of preconceived notions in this field. There's a lot of ideas that people have that date back to almost time immemorial about what this disease is. One thing I've learned along the way is that there's almost nothing, I would say there's very, very little that we can say with absolute certainty about this disease. We know that there are people that are afflicted by these symptoms, and it's a syndrome, and there's a wide panoply of different experiences people have along the way. And then we have a lot of these constructs that have come up over time that we've associated with this disease. But none of them are, I would say a lot of them are built on a temple of sand in some ways. We can't say with absolute certainty that any of them are absolutely true, or that they are linked entirely to the cause of this disease, and that by solving them, we'll actually solve this disease as a whole. So I would just encourage all the basic scientists, especially the young researchers out there, to question everything you're told. I mean, it's something that shouldn't have to be said. It's kind of the staple of being a scientist, is to question everything and to be skeptical. But I think it's just an important thing to be reminded of again and again and again, that what we think we know about this disease might not necessarily be the case. Now, the fourth part of what I hope to see going forward, my fourth part of my wish list, is for smarter, more focused trials. And what I mean by that is this. This is the landscape of Parkinson's disease clinical trials at the moment. It's 170 or so trials that are ongoing. It's a mix of both symptomatic and disease-modifying trials. And I want to focus on the disease-modifying trials in particular, of which there are 77 ongoing. But only 8 of them target a specific subtype of this disease. Now, why is that important? Well, I think it's long been known that Parkinson's disease is a spectrum of disorder. It's probably not going to be any one disease. And yet we're still clumping together all the patients with this label that have Parkinson's disease into one trial. Only 8 of them have actually taken the steps necessary to try to identify specific subtypes. And for those 8, they're all genetic subtypes, the GBA gene and the LRRK2 gene. But I wonder what those other 69 trials are doing. I often wonder how the investigators that run those trials were able to convince everyone that they had the magic pill that was going to alleviate the symptoms, or at least slow down the disease progression of everyone else who's clumped together under this amorphous label that we have called Parkinson's disease. Now, how do we get to these smarter, more focused trials? Well, the genetic discoveries are great, but I don't think they're enough. I think what we'll need to do is this. Come on. We need to refocus on finding better markers of this disease. We need a better, more concerted effort to find biological signals that can tell us more about this disease than any clinician ever could. So that in the future, when patients walk into their doctor's office and get a diagnosis like this, it's not just based on this, what Michael J. Fox would call an elaborate drunk test, the UPDRS test, but we actually have discrete tests that we can give that can give us much more specific information. Now, up till this point, there's been a few biomarker studies done, but there haven't been nearly enough, and they haven't been done, in my opinion, well enough. Now, there's the PPMI study, there's the Luxembourg study, there's another study in the Netherlands, but the one that I think has the most promise, and the one that I've spent the past 6 months working to help develop as well, is one in Cincinnati that's based around basically this philosophy that we don't know what we're talking about when we talk about these diseases. So what we're doing in this study is we're lumping together 5,000 people, 2,000 people with any form of Parkinsonisms, and 2,000 people with any form of dementia, along with 1,000 healthy controls. We're separating them entirely from their clinical diagnosis, so that the analysts who then take all the information that we get from their samples that we collect have no idea what kind of diagnosis these individuals had, and they just have to use their analytic tools combined with their understanding of biology and the bioassays that we're developing to find new ways of subtyping these individuals. And the hope is that eventually we'll be able to have discrete targets that are identified for each of those individuals. Now, the name of this study is the CCBP, the Cincinnati Cohort Biomarker Program. And for my money anyways, I think it has a lot of promise to help us get to more specific subtypes of this disease. Although I'd encourage anyone out there to go and compare the protocols for the CCBP with the PPMI and the Luxembourg study and the other biomarker studies that are out there, and come to your own conclusions about what you think, which ones you think have the most promise in the future. But I do fundamentally think these kind of longitudinal studies where we just try to better understand human aging in general are going to be fundamental to actually getting us breakthrough therapies that we need. So, in summary, the wish list is these 4 things. Integrate patients into every step of the process, focus more on individuals and give them the tools needed to better monitor, track, and take care of their disease, smarter, more focused trials, and trying to do what we can to fix science itself. Now, that's a lot to ask, but frankly, it's, I think, what patients need if we're going to make steady progress in the future and over the next 10 years. Now, a lot of these problems and a lot of these issues that I talk about I delve into them in much more depth in a book that I just wrote with Alberto Espe. It started about in January of last year. We started a correspondence based on an article that he wrote. I reached out to him because I was amazed by this article that he wrote in the Journal of Parkinson's at the end of 2018 with Tony Lang. And we started a correspondence and we realized we shared a lot of the same skepticisms of the field. And over time, that correspondence grew into this book. It's now available through ebook all around the world, as well as in Europe at the moment, the paperback is, and the paperback will be coming to North America and the rest of the world by the end of August. So yeah, with that, I say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me today. If anybody has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to give, I think we have about 20 more minutes this morning. I'm happy to answer them now. But if any questions come up in the future, or if anybody's listening to this in the future, feel free to reach out to me through any of these channels. I try to be the bridge, try as much as I can to be the bridge between the patient world and the research world and the clinical world. So if there's anything I can do in the future to help anyone out with any of their endeavors in this regard, feel free to reach out. And with that, I say thank you, and I guess I'll stop sharing my screen at the moment.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. I think we have the first question from Charles Venuto. He says, I agree with the notion that we should begin thinking about designing PD drug trials in a more precise way based on disease phenotype. How would you feel as a patient if you were excluded from a trial due to your predicted disease progression pattern?
It would be tough, that's for sure. And I've been excluded from plenty of trials in the past for a variety of reasons as well. A lot of them was because I was too young to participate in some of them. And it's not an easy thing for any patient to hear, but at the end of the day, I think we care more about getting the results that we want rather than, you know, making sure that everyone feels good.
Right, and I know we're fortunate to have people like John Mink on the call who's done a lot of great work in Batten disease, helping to subtype it in a way that helps promote meaningful therapeutic progress. We also have Gretchen Burbeck on here who's done substantial work in Zambia and Malawi. Perhaps she can speak to the video you shared about Parkinson's disease in Africa. And lastly, we have Benzie Kluger on here who's done a lot in integrative medicine, medicinal marijuana, mindfulness, etc. So I'm sort of calling on them to maybe to share some insights on your talk and just their experiences in general.
I guess just, no one else is stepping forward. I'm Benzie Kluger. Yeah, enjoyed the talk. That there were some things that I've also been thinking about. One piece of it, and which you might want to comment on, I think about a lot, is palliative care and palliative care approaches. I think might have been in point 2 of the talk, you were talking about kind of a comprehensive care team. And I think, I don't know, I guess we go in a few directions with this. I mean, one is, how can we make, it's important to focus on a cure, but I think there's a lot we can do to take better care of people today. And I feel like part of that is also going outside of the medical model of a patient as a person defined by an illness and start talking about the person living with that illness and saying how we can help, the emotional journey, spiritual and existential journey, and also provide people, better guidance for, the whole disease course, including dealing with end-of-life issues, which is something that comes up for people with Parkinson's. So maybe I'll just kind of pause there and see if it's something you've thought about or read about, or if that, fits into your prescription.
Yeah, it is actually. And actually, Benzie, I've heard about you, I think, through Leonard Suckle. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yep.
Yeah, he actually spoke a lot about the work that you do and a lot of the important work that's going on in palliative care centers to make sure that patients have a much better, much smoother journey through this disease process. And I think something that can be done and should be done is to make them feel more a part of the process rather than a subject of the process. We want as much autonomy as we can, and we want as much agency as we can throughout our progression and throughout life in general. I mean, humans don't like to be subjects of anybody really, let alone a disease. So I think a vital part of making sure that patients are as healthy as possible is one, making sure they're as informed as can be, or as informed as they want to be, I would say, about their disease and about what can be done, and have avenues available for them to integrate their voice into what's being done so that they have a say in the process as well. And this picks up on the question that was just raised by Hugh Johnston, and it's a question I would have for everybody here. How many of you would say you have access to informed advice from patients like we have at the Toronto Western Hospital through our patient board? And I wonder how many, if there's any kinds of initiatives like this, any other kinds of initiatives like this out there, maybe in the Rochester area or otherwise people have heard about, that actually give patients an avenue to express themselves and to have their voice heard and to integrate their decision-making as well into the process, into a lot of the processes that go on at clinics and research centers around the world.
I guess since I have the floor and I can talk with you offline, so at Colorado, we actually had an amazing patient and family advisory council, and I totally agree with you that it really helped our research quite a bit in terms of measuring what matters, in terms of study design, in terms of the questions that we asked. We're in the process, or I'm in the process of setting up a similar thing right now and working with the Parkinson's Foundation. I don't know if you're aware of their PAIR program, Parkinson's Advocacy and Research, which is, I think, a great program and has trained a lot of great advocates who are patient advocates in the field and are doing great work across the country.
Yeah, those programs definitely have been a big boost in a lot of different ways, and it would be great to see more patients have access to them. I can just say also, not only has being a part of the patient advisory board been an uplifting experience in Toronto because it's been a personal joy as well to have your voice heard and to have a say in things that go on. It's almost therapeutic in its own sense that it's giving you an avenue from which to express yourself and to feel like your voice matters in the process.
Adnan here. I'm a TBI researcher at the University of Rochester, and I have a quick question. In all the trials you were seeing, and you have access to, I was wondering if anyone is delineating the sort of contribution of TBI to the emergence of Parkinson's in at least a subset of patients with this disease.
So it's funny enough, it's not something that I run into very often. I know that I just saw a report from the NFL that showed that traumatic brain injury is now resulting in they're suspecting it results in so they made projections about how much money they had to spend for the insurance company, I guess, made projections about how much money they were going to have to spend to cover the healthcare of their NFL, of the people in the NFL, and their projections actually came in threefold lower than the reality. So what we're realizing is that there's the prevalence of TBI, or its long-term effects, are much more disastrous than I think we even than our models forecasted. But it's not something, to be honest, that I come across very often because I don't know that many patients that were boxers or football players myself.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of research coming out that prior history of TBI is really associated with increased dementia, and it's not just at the professional level. You know, some forms of TBI and TBI is a severity scale of mild, which is concussion, and moderate and severe. For a long time, we've known that moderate and severe actually does increase sort of manifestation of neurodegenerative processes, Parkinson's included. But at the professional level, yes, there's definitely an increase in most motor neuron diseases, ALS and Parkinson's and such. And so that is, you know, it seems like it's an understudied component that could potentially be a causative factor in some of these, you know, for individuals with susceptibility already that's being overlooked.
Yeah, I agree completely. The only troubling part is in difficulty in studying this disease, especially when it comes to identifying what causes anyone's particular disease, is that, I mean, you go through a patient's personal history and you find so many different factors that seemingly connect with their disease and their disease progression. I mean, I just go back through my own history and I can remember, you know, when I was a kid playing soccer, I ran into a goalpost at some point. Now, if I read up a lot at the early stages about TBI, I might associate that directly with the disease progression itself and the reason why I got it so early on. But then there's all sorts of other factors: exposure to pesticides, malnutrition at some point along the way, or a viral infection as well. So identifying any one individual's cause of their disease retroactively becomes really difficult, and it's something that a lot of research has gone into. And obviously it's something that we need to do a better job of so that we can have better preventative measures going forward as well. But once a patient gets diagnosed, I don't know how anyone would be able to determine which set of factors was the causal point that actually triggered their disease onset and progression.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I see a question from Hugh. Why are researchers comfortable with a process that takes 15 years or longer to develop a treatment, and what are your big ideas to change that? I'll say, as a researcher and pharmacologist, I'm not comfortable with that process. It takes entirely too long. But for the second part of the question, I'll turn that over to you.
Well, Hugh's now got his video going. I don't know if you wanted to add anything in particular to that, but there's definitely a lot of frustration in the patient community about why it takes so long for a drug to be developed and why there's this seeming kind of comfort, in some sense, from our perspective anyways, a lot of the times, that we're kind of, it's just the status quo, it's the way things are done, and there's not much that can be done about it.
Yeah, I guess, can anybody, hopefully you can hear me. The question I would ask is, in what other big endeavors do we put up with such a slow process that doesn't seem to get a lot of results? And the answer is not so many.
Yeah, there's kind of a fallback that this disease is very complicated and drug development takes a long time. And I mean, yeah, that's just the way it is. And if you look back at the history of medicine, I mean, even levodopa took, I think, over a decade before it was actually, and even still, it's being reformulated and made into better versions and finding new ways to deliver it. So it's a continual incremental process of improvement.
So Ben, one of the big things I'm hearing from a lot of Parkinson's patients, and particularly the
Speak up a bit, Hugh, or yell a bit into the microphone.
One thing that I'm finding with some of the patient advocates, and particularly the people who live with Parkinson's, their family members in particular, is how can we be so fast on COVID and so slow on Parkinson's?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. What can we learn from our experiences now with the coronavirus that might help inform how we do things going forward? I mean, it's going to, our estimates, best estimates is that we're going to have a vaccine ready within a year. No, obviously there's a greater sense of urgency with the coronavirus globally than there ever could be with Parkinson's. what could be done, what lessons can be learned that can actually help us spur innovation in Parkinson's disease as well, based on what we're learning from the COVID trials. And one thing I've learned anyways is that it seems like when it comes to trying to identify which therapies or which existing therapies work best for, or that can be repurposed for a new disease, the bigger trial, the better. So the one trial that has produced, I think, the most definitive results was out of Oxford, where they had 5,000 patients in the trial. And they were repurposing a bunch of drugs on them, and they found whatever, one of the steroids that was beneficial. But it looks like the key result of that is that one trial with 5,000 patients is better than 50 trials with 100 patients when it comes to that specific kind of repurposing trial. I don't know if anyone else has seen has come across any other revelations from all the COVID trials going on out there.
When you have 5,000 patients, you can let the biology take you all sorts of different places, and you can segregate the patients into who responds, who doesn't, who's getting impacted, who's not. And we need to do the same thing in these neurodegenerative diseases that aren't just one single cause.
Yeah, of course, I guess the pushback would be is that those trials are much easier because they have a much more definitive endpoint. The patient survived or they didn't. In Parkinson's, we don't have that kind of clear definitive endpoint that we can give. But still, there must be some innovations that can be made that can allow us to better assess which therapies work and which ones don't. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I think we have about 5 minutes left if anyone does want to jump in with any other. I just want to thank Monica again and thank everyone for listening, and thank you for all the contributions that you've made. And I hope that going forward, we can all work together to speed up discovery of therapies for this disease and ensure a better future for all of us.
Thank you so much, Benjamin, for joining us. And I'll reach out to you after this for some of those links and YouTube videos if you don't mind, and I can share them with the group.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.